Hi. Ooh, that is on. Hi everyone, so I'm Matt and I'm the LGBT officer of the LSE Students' Union. Thanks for coming.
And hi, I'm Dorothy and I'm the president of the Student Action for Refugee Society here at the LSE, and I would also like to welcome you and thank you all for coming, you and our speakers, of course. And I would like to thank Hakan, Dr. Hakan Seckinelgin for chairing the event tonight. Hakan is a professor at the Social Policy Department here at the LSE, and also an LSE Research Fellow at the Civil Society and Human Security Research Unit. He will introduce the speakers and then chair the discussion later on. So I hope we'll all have an interesting and informative evening.
Should be good.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome to the LSE, but also to this event. My name is Hakan Seckinelgin. I teach in the Social Policy Department. I think this is a very important topic, and it sort of happens by accident, I guess. Happens on an interesting time period when we had this very interesting report coming out of Parliament last week on asylum seekers and the way they are treated at the point of entry to the country, I think. Just want to introduce our panel. It's a very impressive panel. When I was given the names, I was slightly taken aback. Oh God, there's a combined experience here. It's so overwhelming. I think it should be quite interesting to hear their work. I will present them in the order they will talk to you or talk to us. The first person we have is Peter Tatchell. And as someone else was saying last week, I think Peter probably is one of those people who doesn't need any introductions in this context. But nonetheless, he has campaigned for human rights, democracy and global justice and LGBT freedom for 47 years. He pioneered the ideas for single comprehensive equality legislation from the late 1970s onwards, and recently spearheaded the campaign for civil marriage and civil partnership equality in the UK. His human rights activism has resulted in him being badly beaten by President Mugabe's bodyguards in 2001 and by Russian neo-Nazis in 2007, as well as campaigning to complete the unfinished battle for LGBT equality in Britain. Peter also works in solidarity with human rights activists in many countries, including Iran, Uganda, Iraq, Russia, Pakistan, Bahrain, Zimbabwe and West Papua. And also he is director of Peter Tatchell Foundation. Welcome, Peter, once again. Thank you for coming. Our second speaker is Amanda Gray, on my right. Amanda Gray is currently working for UNHCR in London, having just returned from mission in Baghdad, Iraq. She is a lawyer by training and has worked for UNHCR in the UK since 2010. Prior to UNHCR, she worked as a solicitor at a national law firm and for a short stint at the International Secretariat of Amnesty International in London. She is the office lead on gender issues, and as part of that role has spearheaded UNHCR engagement with the Home Office in terms of both decision-making and policy responses to LGBT asylum seekers. She has also been engaged in UNHCR's work on LGBT and asylum at a regional level in Western Europe. Welcome, Amanda. Our third speaker is Chelvan, on Amanda's right, immediate right. He is a barrister at number 5 Chambers, and according to Chambers Partners UK, they state that he has great client skills as well as court skills. He's a very eloquent speaker and is very watchable in court. So we are excited to have you. He has probably become the leading practitioner in the UK for political asylum claims on sexuality. He has an international reputation as an expert in claims involving sexual or gender identity from lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and intersex clients, and litigates from the first-tier tribunal to the Supreme Court and the European Court of Human Rights. He regularly advises practitioners, academics, the media, the judiciary, UNHCR, NGOs, parliaments and governments on how to determine LGBTI asylum claims. His different stigma, shame, harm model provides a humane method of providing an LGBTI asylum claim and is endorsed by UNHCR and adopted by New Zealand and Sweden. Welcome, Chairman. And our last speaker is Stuart Matthew Hanson, on the extreme right. Stuart graduated from the... Not pun intended there, but sorry, it happens. Stuart graduated from the University of Sheffield in 2001 with the Miss Blake Award for Academic Excellence. He went on to train as an English teacher, where he taught refugees and asylum seekers in Leeds and Bradford. In 2003, he set up the training company and national awarding body, EMD, which is based in Yorkshire. In 2011, he was appointed as a magistrate in Leeds Magistrates Court and sits on the family bench. From 2011 onwards, he focused on immigration law and went on to represent many of the UK's Premiership football teams, which he continues to do today. In 2012, he realised there was an acute need for a specialist immigration advisory service for LGBT asylum seekers who did not qualify for legal aid. As a result of this, he set up the charitable organisation No Going Back. The national organisation recently hosted 2 very successful LGBT Christmas carol services in both Leeds and London. Stuart has also appeared at St Andrews University on Queer Question Time as a panellist. Welcome, Stuart. Thank you. I just want to say I have one reflection before I let the experts actually speak on the topic, and it is linked with a comment made by Peter Townsend, a late colleague of mine in the social policy department, when he was writing in the 50s on the elderly in this country and elderly treatment in this country. And he said, right at the end of the book, he said, the measure of decent society is how we treat most vulnerable in our society. And taking that measure, the UK at the time was failing miserably, according to him. And I think we can really paraphrase this in relation to us asylum seekers as well. I mean, I suppose measure of decent society today should include how we treat people who don't belong initially to our society and how we engage with them. So on that note, I'll just ask Peter to...
Thank you very much. I guess my starting point is the question, why do people seek asylum in Britain and other Western countries? In nearly all cases, regardless of their sexuality, it is because they face great suffering and oppression. They're at risk of arrest, torture, imprisonment, perhaps even murder, either by the state or by extrajudicial death squads. So the people who come here, who seek a safe haven in this country, are fleeing what any of us would flee if we were in the same situation. And Britain has a very clear obligation under the 1951 Refugee Convention to provide a place of safety and security to those with a well-founded fear of persecution. When I look at the vast number, the hundreds of asylum seekers, both LGBT and also political, religious and ethnic refugees that I have helped over the last 20, 25 years, every single story is one of grave personal danger and suffering. Every single instance is of a person who has been at grave risk, if not already suffered greatly as a result of some aspect of them, their lives or their beliefs. So if we want to tackle the issue of refugees, as well as providing, very rightly and very urgently, a place of safe haven, we also need to do what we can through international agencies to address the reasons why these people flee. Because most would not, of their own free choice, move to Britain, Germany, the United States, Australia. They don't want to break with their history, tradition, culture, with their families, their friends. They'd rather be in the home country they know and love. So if we can address the conflict situations, the misogyny, homophobia, racism, religious persecution that forces so many refugees into a position where they feel obliged to seek asylum overseas, then we will be helping them avoid a problem in the first place. Prevention is better than cure. And I'm sorry to say that although seeking asylum is necessary for many people, it is second best. It's solving a problem after it's happened rather than addressing the root causes of the problem. In many parts of the world today, we are witnessing a backlash against LGBT people. You're all familiar with what's been happening recently in India, Uganda, Russia, and Nigeria. Gains won or gains sought have been blocked or even rolled back. But amidst that gloom, I take some comfort. Backlash is never a good thing. It's always regrettable. But backlash is also a sign of the strength and power of the LGBT communities in many of these countries. The reason there is a backlash is because those communities are getting organized. They're defending themselves, they're asserting their rights, and that has provoked a backlash. So there's that paradox. Backlash is bad. We have to fight and resist it and help those people who are struggling against it in so many countries. But we also need to see it in a positive sense, that it is part of the momentum for change. I'm old enough to remember the Black Civil Rights Movement in the United States in the 1960s. People laud Martin Luther King and the Freedom Riders in the Deep South. What they often forget is that heroic struggle of African American people provoked a backlash. The number of lynchings of black people went up during the period of the Black Civil Rights struggle. The terrorization of black communities escalated during the Black Civil Rights struggle. But those people were not deterred. They continued to fight and resist. And ultimately, they won. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that backlash is often part and parcel of the process of social change. Regrettable, I wish we could avoid it, but it is often part of the process of getting from a position of oppression ultimately to a position of liberation. I just want to finish briefly by just summarizing in very, very schematic terms some of the issues that I think the UK asylum system needs to address. Some of these are specific to LGBT refugees and some more generally to all kinds of refugees for many different reasons. And they're based on my experience, and I'm sure others will go into more detail. But the first thing is we need to establish very clearly is that for the asylum system to work fairly and honourably, we need to ensure that every asylum adjudicator, caseworker and Home Office barrister has mandatory, adequate training in sexuality and gender identity issues. To have knowledge and understanding of these issues is absolutely fundamental to them being able to give fair treatment to LGBT refugees. So often we have seen cases where the Home Office or an adjudicator will hold against a woman the fact that she's been married and has children. The assumption will be if you're married and have children, you can't be a lesbian. Completely ignoring the reality that in many societies the social, family, religious and other pressure for women to marry and have children is so great that lesbian women, genuine lesbian women, feel obliged to get married and have families. We also see the repeated examples of a masculine-looking gay man or bisexual man having his sexuality questioned and doubted because he doesn't look the stereotype. We have absurd questions whereby a refugee will be asked, do you read Gay Times? Often put to a refugee who can't read English, let alone have the money, because they're destitute, to buy Gay Times magazine. So that's one issue. We also, I think, need to have reiterated very clearly Home Office guidelines, again to all caseworkers, adjudicators and Home Office barristers, that a well-founded fear of persecution on the grounds of homophobic or transphobic persecution is just as legitimate as persecution on any other grounds, and that it is, in fact, a valid reason to grant someone asylum. Because it seems often that some officials do not treat gender identity and sexual orientation persecution as seriously as religious, political, or ethnic persecution. Another issue that needs to be addressed is the Home Office country information reports. They have improved, and it's down to people like Chelvan and others that as a result we've seen a much greater improvement in those country information reports, on which adjudicators will often make assessments about whether a person is at risk or not. But there is still more work to be done, and not every country is adequately covered, and the information there is not sufficiently accurate about the scale of gender identity and sexual orientation persecution. Further issue is the very poor funding for asylum claims. Legal aid funding has been progressively cut. It is virtually impossible for any solicitor to prepare an adequate asylum claim based on the amount of money available. And of course they can apply for additional funds, but there's no guarantee they'll get them. And to produce the evidence, the medical reports in some cases, evidence from a home country about imprisonment, this takes time, it also takes money and effort, and therefore the legal aid money available needs to be significantly increased. Likewise, the fast-track system, where many refugees are put into fast-track, they're given 14 days to make a claim. Well, again, to prepare a proper claim, that's virtually impossible, particularly if you've been put in detention. If you're in detention in an asylum detention centre, which is in effect a glorified prison, your chances of being able to prepare an adequate case within 14 days is really just not on. It just can't be done. The other issue that needs to address is the way in which asylum detention centre staff need to take much more proactive action to stamp out homophobic and transphobic abuse and harassment within detention centres. So often, people who fled horrific persecution will be put in somewhere like Harmondsworth or Colnbrook or Yarlswood, and they will face from other detainees the same kind of harassment, abuse and threats and even violence that they've fled. And too often, asylum detention staff do not take adequate action to stop it. The final point I'd say is that when it comes to taking reports, when a person makes their original claim for asylum and they go before a caseworker, we really do have to ensure that people claiming asylum on the grounds of sexual orientation or gender identity will not be interviewed by homophobic people who perhaps are motivated by political homophobia or religious homophobia. I have had so many cases, particularly of Muslim refugees, both straight and LGBT, who have suffered at the hands of asylum caseworkers because they have harboured all the homophobic and transphobic persecutions and prejudices and bad ideas that these people fled. So I think there needs to be some kind of system to ensure that where people have, in particular, religious objections to LGBT people, that they should not be in a position to do the casework on that case. Because time and time again, I've had evidence from applicants that they have not got fair treatment, that they've been disrespected, disbelieved, and even insulted in some cases by these staff. So that's a very quick overview, and I think that we do need to press our government very clearly, because it gave a promise before the last election that this would be one issue that it would address. And I know there have been some improvements, and I'm sure Chelvan and others will talk about them. There have been improvements, but there's not been established yet the fair, safe, secure asylum system for LGBT refugees that the coalition parties promised before 2010. We need to hold them to that promise and make sure they deliver. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next speaker is Amanda Gray.
Thank you. That leads me nicely into my what I've been asked to talk about, and that is improvements that have been made and the challenges that remain. First of all, before I start, just to say thank you very much for the invite, and it's a great pleasure to be on this panel tonight at the LSE to sit with such esteemed experts on this issue. LGBTI persons continue to be persecuted in many parts of the world, as to be gay or lesbian remains a social stigma and a criminal offence in too many societies. So the protection of LGBTI people fleeing such persecution is the very purpose of the 1951 Refugee Convention. With human dignity, its richness and diversity of human life, and the freedom to be its raison d'etre. In recent years, we have seen growing awareness about the rights of LGBTI persons, as Peter has touched on. We've seen it in the human rights community, and we had the 2007 Yogyakarta principles in particular, which have helped contribute to a better understanding of how human rights principles apply and are to be interpreted to LGBTI persons. And this knowledge has helpfully fed into the development of international refugee law for LGBTI persons. We've seen from the first refugee claims that were granted several decades ago now for people who were gay or lesbian, the development of law, and how membership of a particular social group under the 1951 Convention has been used to protect LGBTI persons from going back to persecution. So they fit well within the protection of the Refugee Convention, and I suppose then that leaves the question, why are we not seeing more protection being offered? There has been significant work done and progress made. And there needs to be more work done and more progress made. I'm going to focus on the UK, which is obviously the theme, so I might reference a little bit some research which we've done in the EU later on, but I want to focus on the UK and reflect what's been happening in the UK since 2010, when we had both a political commitment and also the dismissal of the discretion test by the Supreme Court. For those who aren't perhaps aware, prior to 2010, individuals who claimed asylum in the UK on account of their sexual orientation were considered not to be in need of international protection if it would be reasonable for them to be discreet on return to their home country. This demand of discretion, i.e. to conceal one's sexual orientation to avoid persecution, ran completely contrary to UNHCR's guidance at the time, which was clear that a person cannot be expected or required by a state to change or conceal his or her sexual identity in order to avoid persecution. Nor should there be any duty to be discreet or to take certain steps to avoid persecution, such as living a life of isolation or refraining from having relationships. this idea that being gay or lesbian, I have to check my terminology, should be required to be discreet about their sexual orientation was thankfully dismissed by the UK Supreme Court in July 2010 in the famous case of HJ Iran, HT Cameroon. Following this judgment, and this is where I want to talk a little bit in detail because this is where I got involved in the work for UNHCR. Following the Supreme Court judgment, the Home Office started to act with the introduction of specific policy guidance to meet the judgment and the tests that had been set out within that. It was a speedy rollout of both policy and specific training for decision makers on how to handle LGBTI claims. UNHCR in the UK, along with many other stakeholders, were involved in commenting on the policy development and on the training package. And I think this is to be commended for the UK authorities that there was this transparency of policy development at the time. NGO reports such as the Stonewall report on barriers facing LGBT applicants was used to help framework some of the policy thinking and the training package. And these comments were by and large given serious weight by the UK government, then the UK Border Agency. In addition, the Supreme Court test helped provide a framework to the policy. I think it's to be commended with the speed of it, but perhaps that was also a problem with how fast the policy was rolled out. In fact, 6 months after the decision in HT Iran, all UK Border Agency asylum decision makers, or at least this is certainly what is told by UKBA, all UKBA asylum decision makers and senior managers had received the specific training package on LGBTI decision making, and as well as specific asylum policy instruction was in place and public and on the UKBA website. So it was a fast rollout. I want to summarise some of the positive aspects of the policy and training in the time available, so I appreciate it might be quite condensed, and perhaps we can revisit some of the aspects during questions. And then I'll look to the challenges after that. The positive aspects of the policy, which you can access on the website, included a strong focus on the importance of good interviewing skills for this group of applicants, i.e., asking open and sensitive questions around sexual identity, as opposed to a focus or any focus on sexual conduct. Yet, we're still seeing practice which is contrary to this, which raises concerns as to why this policy is not being implemented on the ground. In addition, the training was very supportive of these policy standards, and time was spent, because I sat in on the pilot training, with discussions around how you may question on sexual identity and how you might get at an applicant's sexual identity. And the policy and training were quite clear that the inquiry by the interviewing officer was to be around, or by the asylum decision maker, was to be around the realisation and experience by the applicant of their sexual orientation, both in the country of origin and in the UK. The policy instruction and training also dealt with the issue of late disclosure. This is an issue which affects many asylum seekers, not just LGBTI, and it is an issue that research by NGOs and academics have revealed that the effects of shame, stigma, or trauma can impact memory. And I think we know that LGBTI asylum seekers, many have experienced exactly these things. In addition, LGBTI applicants may have an internal homophobia, leaving them unable to speak about their sexual orientation. And that's quite an interesting one and needs quite delicate interviewing to get around some of what that might bring out in the applicant. There was also a recognition in the training and policy that the asylum process itself can silence the narratives of sexual orientation due to both those internal reasons which I've mentioned, but also external environmental factors, such as a lack of privacy in the screening unit, or harsh or intrusive or insensitive questioning, or time constraints, or being in the DFT. I added the DFT because it wasn't in the policy. These policy standards are to be welcomed, and they are to continue to be monitored for implementation. But there remains challenges for the UK authorities, most critical of which is ensuring that implementation and ensuring that those policy standards are met on the ground. So I want to touch now on some of those challenges, starting with an issue which is something, in my view, and I think many others' view, is central to the fairness of an asylum system and to improving the quality of decision making, and that's the issue of credibility assessment. In brief, for those who aren't aware, credibility assessment, and this is very brief, is an identification of what is material to the claim, and I'm really simplifying it, but it's an identification of what is material to the claim and then considering whether that evidence that is produced to support what is material is indeed credible. Credibility assessment is particularly difficult for LGBTI applicants. So we know it's already a challenge in the asylum process in general. That was raised by the joint, that was raised in October 2013 by the Home Affairs Select Committee, and they referred to the ongoing culture of disbelief in the UK asylum decision making. And there's been various pieces of research to support the fact that credibility assessment remains the main reason for refused negative asylum decisions. For example, asylum aid, still human, still here. But it's particularly difficult for LGBT asylum seekers for various reasons, and I'll just touch on those briefly. To start with, the question of evidence is a particular challenge for an LGBTI person. Being gay or being lesbian is considerably more difficult to establish than, say, race or nationality. In addition, relevant and specific country of origin information on the situation and treatment of LGBTI persons is often lacking, and while it's improving, it remains a serious area of concern. This leaves the decision maker to rely on the applicant's statements alone, their verbal evidence. Applicant statements are often the primary and only source of evidence, and this is especially the case for those individuals who've suffered persecution by non-state actors, i.e. within the private sphere. It's welcome that the policy instruction touched on the credibility assessment in this caseload, and that included, for example, a more generous application of benefit of the doubt, which is another principle perhaps we can touch on in questions. Let me see. However, in addition to this, the issue of self-identification is something which continues to be of concern. And I'll touch on that as well in questions, but just to say that what I mean by self-identification is the verbal evidence being given the weight, and that is enough without any documentary evidence or additional evidence to support that. Here, the policy instruction does not go far enough to adopt UNHCR guidance when it states that, generally speaking, self-identification as a lesbian, gay or bisexual would be the normal starting point as an indication of a person's sexual orientation. The question is left for me, where do decision makers go after that starting point? These inherent difficulties with assessing credibility for this group of asylum seekers is in part due to the fact that credibility assessment is conducted by human beings who bring their own element of subjectivity into the decision-making process. While the training developed in the UK and the policy have tried to address some of these issues, we remain with this fundamental challenge. Therefore, I think it is vital that the government and decision makers, or those in charge of decision makers, have a heightened awareness of these subtle pressures that decision makers face, which may threaten the objectivity of asylum decision making for LGBTI people. These include the background, life experiences, beliefs, whether they're religious or not, gender, sexual orientation, and thinking process of asylum decision makers. There is also the institutional and political environment, which we know and we're aware of with the immigration authorities in the UK and how asylum sits there. More subtle, I think, is the issue of case hardening, which is a very real issue, and there's now increasing evidence that post-traumatic stress disorder can transfer to the decision maker when they constantly hear stories of trauma, rape, violence, and I think that's very interesting. This can ultimately affect the starting point of belief, disbelief, or neutrality. Linked to credibility assessment, and very briefly, is the issue of sexualisation, which I've touched on when I talked about interviewing skills. But this overemphasis by some decision makers on sexual acts rather than sexual orientation as an identity remains in need of serious address. Not only has the focus been on sexual acts, Not only has the focus on sexual acts led to intrusive questioning, which is simply not appropriate to try and prove that someone is gay or lesbian or bisexual, etc., but it also overlooks the fact that LGBTI persons are often persecuted because of how they may be perceived by society and or the threat that they are thought to represent to prevailing social and cultural norms in their country of origin. I think that is critical and needs to be looked at in much more depth. Finally, an issue is stereotyping, which, to be honest, the references to pink cocktails and Kylie did not help. But this continues to be something we see in decisions, a preoccupation by decision makers of a Western-style image of someone who is LGBTI. Again, it links to the preoccupation with obtaining evidence to prove that someone is LGBTI. So where are we now? Very quickly, because I see my time. We must recognise that without the implementation on the ground of the current policy into practice, the quality of decision-making will not improve as it needs to so desperately for this group of claims. This is not to say that the policy itself does not demand improvements. I've already touched on some of those issues very briefly, and it does. As with all UK asylum policies, it should be an ongoing renewal and updating of policy. But it is something, and it's in place, and it's not bad. The problem is it's not being implemented. The complex concepts covered in the policy and the case law that we have in the UK need to translate into the daily practice of asylum decision makers. This is a main challenge in the UK, and we need to look at how we can address it. Training is a start and needs to do more to go through and apply what the courts and the policy say to how they can be exercised in practice. Other skill sets, such as interviewing beyond the purpose of the interview to get at the material facts, such as soft skills, sensitive interviewing, need to be looked at. In addition, training needs to cover self-awareness in decision makers so that they can identify and address their own prejudices and stereotypes, which may be undermining their impartiality. It also has to be acknowledged that decision makers are under extreme pressure by time and targets. And we need to recognise that this is a complex caseload, and how do we make sure that we find the balance between getting a speedy resolution for an individual so that they can start to rebuild their lives in balance with getting a quality decision. Monitoring the quality of decisions is also a vital safeguard in such a complex caseload. Since 2004, UNHCR has been working with the UK Border Agency, now the VI, to develop a quality audit system for all asylum cases and to achieve an improvement in the quality, in particular, of first instance decision making. And also, this has been thematically rolled out for LGBTI cases in 2011 when the UK Border Agency did a quality audit of LGBTI claims. But more of this is required. It's not enough to do it once. It needs to be done annually or regularly to ensure that there's ongoing monitoring of decisions. The other things just to mention are the need to collect better data. Such data could include statistics on the number of sexual orientation cases overturned at appeal to help identify particular areas that require further attention through training or guidance. Statistics can also help to dispel the myths around this floodgate of LGBTI claims, and I think that's another important, softer angle that needs to be looked at. So in short, while the UK has to be commended on the developments in policy and training since 2010, it will be of limited effect if challenges such as prejudices of decision-making prevail among those responsible for conducting decisions. The environment must also be adapted, time allowed, and a multidisciplinary approach applied to credibility assessment that recognises the complexity of getting at someone's identity. However, there's hope. Evidence is clear that prejudices can be overcome, and with better implementation of policy and ongoing training, monitoring and self-awareness amongst decision makers, it is possible that we can have a fair asylum process for LGBT applicants in the UK so that they can find refuge here and rebuild their lives.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Thank you. Next speaker, Chelvan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can I have a show of hands for how many people in this room spend their Sunday mornings watching the Hollyoaks Omnibus? Am I the only person? Oh, come on. There are more people in this room who watch Hollyoaks? Seriously? No? Okay. Well, let me just share with you, as a person who's not still out clubbing on a Sunday morning like the rest of you, that they've been suddenly having a storyline of a gay asylum seeker called Vincent from Nigeria. And Vincent got asylum yesterday. Now, can I please recommend to you that if you ever watch this on 4 On Demand, that the way the Hollyoaks script portrayed the asylum process in the UK has got nothing to do with what actually happens on the ground. What I'm going to try and do tonight is condense what I usually have 3 hours to do in about 15 minutes in relation to the asylum system in the UK. So fasten your seatbelts. 1951 Refugee Convention, the countries of the world get together and they say enough is enough. We can't have the horrors of the Holocaust ever happening again. If people arrive into our countries and say we need safety, we will give them safety. And that's what the UK did. It signed up to the 1951 Refugee Convention and said that we will provide safety. But what we also know is that the convention did not protect all groups. So, those gay men who have found themselves in the concentration camps and the labour camps with the pink triangle rather than Star of David, who were also there to be protected when they fled those countries where they were suffering persecution, would not be protected. They were still being harmed by countries such as the UK. And what we need to find at the heart of any refugee claim is that we're looking at correcting historical wrongs and we're looking at a living instrument. Now, in 2007, the experts of the world got together in a lovely little town on the island of Java called Yogyakarta and said, look, what are we really looking at when we look at sexual orientation or gender or identity? And in 2007, they came up with a definition for sexual orientation. And this is a very important definition from which all LGBTI claims should commence from. Sexual orientation is understood to refer to each person's capacity for profound emotional, affectional, and sexual attraction to and intimate and sexual relations with individuals of a different gender or the same gender or more than one gender. Importantly, it's not just about sex. It's about love. It's about desire. So we're not just fixating about the sexual act. Gender identity is understood to refer to each person's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond with the sex assigned at birth, including the personal sense of the body, which may involve, if freely chosen, modification of the bodily appearance or function by medical, surgical, or other means, and other expressions of gender, including dress, speech, and mannerisms. Please don't fixate on surgical means as being able to identify gender transition. An individual can identify with the gender ascribed through their own experiences without surgical means. So that's a very important aspect of gender identity. So here we come to the seminal case of H.J. Iran and H.G. Cameroon in 2010. And I had some involvement with this case starting from 2008, when I was asked by a charity I was involved in, called the UK Lesbian and Gay Immigration Group, to help this man from Cameroon who found himself in a detention centre in Scotland and then transferred to the UK in relation to his asylum claim. So what happened with H.G. Cameroon? H.G. Cameroon was a 40-year-old man from Cameroon. It was a warm summer's night in late summer of 2007, and he walks outside of his home into his back garden. The moon is shining, the stars are out in the sky. He's there with his boyfriend. The moment takes over, and he kisses his boyfriend in his back garden. It's late at night. Fortunately for H.G. Cameroon, one of his nosy neighbours saw him kissing his boyfriend. And then the word started spreading across the community. There's a homosexual. The name-calling started. Then the stone-throwing. And then the sticks. And then one day as he was walking back from church, the mob descended on him. They beat him to the ground. Somebody tried to cut off his penis with a knife and had to safeguard his genitals and got cut on the hand. They started kicking him on the ground. The police arrived. What's going on here? But instead of protecting H.G. Cameroon, the police, when they found out that he was gay, started joining in the kicking. He was hospitalised for 2 weeks. And thankfully, through some Canadian Jesuit priests, they managed to get him out of Cameroon. When he arrived in the UK, he didn't want to stay in the UK, he actually wanted to go to Canada. But he had to transit to the UK, so he stayed in London for a few weeks. But just as he was about to go through the boarding gate to get to his flight to Canada, the British authorities found out that he was using a false passport. What did they do? They locked him up for using a false passport. He then went to a Scottish tribunal in Glasgow, which accepted that he was gay, which accepted from the medical evidence that he was beaten to the ground, which accepted that he could not go back to his home area because people knew he was gay. But they said because he had declared his sexuality, that he's the one who breached his discretion, then he could go and live somewhere else in Cameroon. That's what they said. We accept that you're gay. We accept that you suffer persecution. Go somewhere else in Cameroon and pretend not to be gay. That's a UK court in 2008 saying that to HD Cameroon. Go to the Court of Appeal, and because of the time constraints, the Supreme Court said in 2010, no, enough is enough. And I'm going to correct Amanda in a way. The discretion test is not gone. But what it has done is saying that because straight people wouldn't find it reasonably tolerable to be discreet, then gay people can also find it not reasonably tolerable to be discreet. But only if one of their reasons for discretion is because of fear of persecution. Now, paragraph 82 of the guidelines for the lawyers here, these are the guidelines, we're going to rush through these because of the time. Element 1, are you gay or will you be perceived to be gay? That's limb 1 of the HJHT test. Limb 2, importantly for the test, is what happens to those who are openly gay in the country of origin? Because remember, if you're in Uganda, you're going to have a small number of activists who are going to be brave enough to be open. Doesn't mean that all gay men and lesbians are persecuted, because the majority of them aren't open. Because they're too bloody scared to be open. Because they know what will happen to them if they are open. So the second limb is, what would happen to those who are open? The third question is, will the individual be open on return? The Supreme Court accepted that the majority of us, because we're human beings, that fight or flight principle, the majority of us will flee. We'll pretend not to be gay or lesbian because we fear harm. But there will be the few of us who are the gay martyrs who will say, enough is enough. This is who I am. I can't change who I am. So the Supreme Court accepted that in limb 3. Will they be open? The fourth limb is that, well, would you be discreet only because of family or social pressure? Now, I've been dealing with LGBTI claims for the past 13 years, and I can tell you I've never had a client who travels thousands of miles who says, I'm worried about a bit of name-calling. But the Supreme Court had to provide guidelines to tribunals and courts. Not only here in the UK, the Supreme Court realised that its decisions would be read the world over, and they have been followed in many jurisdictions around the world. However, if a material reason, i.e. one of the reasons out of many, is that you fear persecution, then you are a refugee. But what happened then? Well, up to 2010, the Home Office didn't have that much of a problem in accepting that somebody was gay. Because what they had, in the majority of decisions, were negative decisions saying, well, you will choose to be voluntarily discreet. We're not imposing that on you, but because of the situation in Iran, you will choose to be voluntarily discreet and you can be sent home. So after the Supreme Court said that can't happen, we moved from discretion to disbelief. That's what Jenny Milbank said in what happened in Australia in the early 2000s. We don't believe you're gay. Prove to me that you're gay. Now, the general issue is this. How can a gay asylum seeker prove that they're gay? Well, I have to confess something. I know I'm here at LSE, but I'm also a PhD student at King's, and I'm told that we stole your mascot in 2009, and I'm not here to return it. But what I do when I'm thinking about my PhD stuff is thinking, what are we really looking at in trying to prove that somebody's lesbian or gay? And in June 2011, I was invited to Geneva by UNHCR because they were having a meeting with international NGOs. And UNHCR was saying, well, come on, guys, you need to help us because we're getting a lot of interest from government saying, give us a questionnaire. Now, being the shy, retiring, wallflower type I am, I basically said, over my dead body. Because I know that if we have a questionnaire of 40 questions, what will happen is that if you only answer 15 out of 40 questions correctly, the Home Office will say, you're not gay. You haven't proved that you're gay. If you answer 39 out of the 40 questions correctly, they say, you've gone onto the internet and found the answers. Because that's what they did with the minority clan Somali cases. You've learnt the answers. So what I said is, well, look, what are we looking at in a claim? It's not necessarily that somebody is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans or intersex person, but they're not straight enough. So how do we prove that a person is gay? Okay, does this photograph prove that I'm gay? Come on, hands up. This is my husband and I in Soho in early 2011. A German photographer came up to us and said, guys, I need to take a photograph of you, you've got great energy. Those are two dogs. On the left is Nomos, the black mini dachshund, that's Greek for law. And on the right is Veritas, which is Latin for truth. You can see legal family there. You can see that we're coordinated clothes, good-looking men, moisturise the skin. I mean, come on, guys. Does this not prove that I'm gay? Hands up. Oh, come on. Please, come on. Okay. Well, the question is, how do we not prove that somebody is gay? Well, we don't prove that somebody is gay by attaching electrodes to their genitals to measure sexual stimuli in relation to pornography. Philometry and vaginal photosomnography was actually employed by the Slovak and Czech Republic sexologists up to 2009 to prove that somebody was lesbian or gay. I kid you not. This is the Aurum report of 2011. This is the type of machinery which will be put on your penis or inserted into your vagina to measure sexual stimuli to prove that you're gay. 2009 in Europe. I kid you not. The German Administrative Court in September 2009 stopped the removal of an Iranian gay man to the Czech Republic on the basis that there was a real risk that will be an infringement of Article 3 of the European Convention if he was sent to the Czech Republic because of this machinery. How else not to prove that you're lesbian or gay? Well, this is somebody filming and photographing somebody having sex. Where do you think this happens in Europe? Okay. I kid you not. In the last 12 months, we've seen a very large rise because of the culture of disbelief that lesbian and gay asylum seekers in the UK feel so pressurised to prove that they're lesbian or gay that they film or photograph themselves in sexual acts to try and prove that they're lesbian or gay. And the legal representative of one of these individuals said, well, after all, it's for the client still to prove that he is gay and not the Home Office. I cannot see a way of getting around this. I don't think turning up to court stating the client is gay and leaving it at that would assist the client. If all you have is a DVD, then I think you should use it. That's a lawyer, a solicitor, saying this is what legitimizes his approach in using such material in the claim of a gay man. Note, he didn't even watch the DVD before submitting it, and the Home Office response, not gay because he wasn't aroused in the film clip. I am not joking. Another way not to ask a person how to prove that they're lesbian or gay, when did you first realise that you were gay or lesbian or bisexual? Now, my gaydar is going off the radar in this room, so I'm just going to ask somebody to volunteer themselves who self-identifies as straight male. I was right, wasn't I? Come on, no straight men in this room. Oh, gee, thank you, sir. I did say my gaydar's going off the radar. So, good evening. Very well. You're in a safe space. Nobody's going to harm you, nobody's going to remove you. Very important to tell that to a asylum seeker, whatever their background, the creation of a safe space. We'll talk about that in a minute. When did you first realise you were straight? Sorry? Well, I'm sorry. I'm the UK Home Office. You don't know when you first realised you were straight? I'm sorry, you haven't proven that you're straight. Now, isn't it ridiculous that a gay asylum seeker is asked, when did you first realise you're gay? And this is the first question which is in the guidance of the US handbook. I hit the roof when I read this. I was on a panel event last year, and I had some really eloquent colleagues from the US, and they helped draft the questions. And I just said, sorry, I know we're supposed to be all friends here, but you cannot ask that as the first question. In The Observer, a week last Sunday, they highlighted the questions a bisexual asylum seeker was asked. One of the questions he was asked is, well, did you ejaculate in him? Why did you use a condom? This was an interview transcript in October 2013. I kid you not. Okay, now, I pause there for a second because I'm just going to take a breather, because if you thought that you'd seen all the personal photographs from my family album so far tonight, unfortunately you haven't. Please share with me. And this is a photograph from January 1983. Now, it's a birthday party. It's actually my little brother's 7th birthday. You can see him in the blue jumper. Yeah, happy birthday to him. This is Burgess Hill in Sussex, January 1983. Can you see the little boy in the brown jumper? Yeah, that's me. And this photograph is very important for two reasons. First of all, it is important because it's only one of two photographs which exist on this panel, on this planet, where a photograph is taken and I'm not facing the photographer. Do you believe it? No, sorry. This is another one. That's me walking down the tour at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution section of the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. I just wanted to share that with you. I was part of the Olympic Games. Yeah, wonderful. Going back to my brother's birthday, that's my maternal grandmother. In the background, she's from Sri Lanka. We're having a really good time. This is my brother now. He operates on brains. He's a neurosurgeon up in Northumberland. The reason why he became a neurosurgeon is that when he was 11, he decided that he wanted to transplant my brain into a monkey skull and a monkey's brain into my skull and see which was the cleverer. So if I start jumping up and down demanding bananas, please help me. But going back to this, look at the birthday party. Can you see the birthday cake? Can you see the birthday cake? He's 7 years old. It's 1983. I'll try to explain if it's not a very clear image. It's a football field. 7 years old, boy's boy, football field. Oh my goodness, I've got to... Okay, let me 5 minutes. September 1981, my 7th birthday. There's me in Burgess Hill again. You see the birthday cake now. It's a number 7. It's pistachio green with pink roses. Because that's what I wanted. I wanted a pistachio green birthday cake with pink roses. I was 7 years of age. It's my brother's 9th birthday. This is 1985, we're now in Worthing. He's got an R2-D2 character. Star Wars. Boy's boy. My 9th birthday, there's my father saying, look, Chelvan, you've invited all these girls to your birthday party. You're 9 years old. For goodness sake, sit with on there. Because, I'm just more friendly with girls. Because, we just chat about boys and make daisy chains and do hopscotch. Because, that's how just I related. I was 9 years old. And look at my birthday cake there. Pale blue marzipan with roses and butterflies. I just wanted it. Yes, and my parents didn't know that I was gay until I was 21. There we are. But what am I trying to say here? Is that, I was 9 years old. I wasn't having sex at 9 years of age, was I? I wasn't, okay? Just for the record. But what I was doing is finding that I wasn't conforming to certain gender-normative stereotypes. I was different. And that's why I created the DISH model in 2011, because the first question to ask a lesbian and gay asylum seeker, after you've created the safe space, after you've asked, how do you self-identify? Don't impose labels on people. Ask them, how do you describe yourself? And the first question you ask is, when did you first realise you were different? And that switches a light bulb in the majority of LGBTIs. Not all, but the majority. Because they suddenly remembered, when I was a boy, I did like doing other things with the other boys. I didn't quite fit in. And it predates by years any awareness of sexual feelings or sexual conduct. And it becomes a very detailed narrative within the lives of an LGBTI person. So you have the core components, and I know I'm running out of time, so let's go through quickly. Difference, recognition that you're not like other people of your same gender, that you have different emotions, recognition of different gender identities in gender identity cases, girl born into a male body. Issues that you may have commencement of same-sex conduct. If you're in Iraq, you may have no commencement for same-sex conduct because you're absolutely petrified what will happen if your family, let alone the authorities or the militia, find out that you're lesbian or gay. I'm going to skip this because of the time. Stigma then arises because you realise that your local imam, your church, your community does not approve of who you are, what you are. You're not even human at this stage because the society in general imposes certain labels and stereotypes on you. Following stigma, of course, is shame. Natural consequence. We're not talking about psychiatric measurements in relation to nervous breakdowns or post-traumatic stress disorder. It's automatically natural that once you have different stigma, you will have internalized shame. If you ask the majority of LGBTI people the world over, different stigma shame comes into the majority of the narratives. Ask any of us here. We've all been through it. Even kids today with their wonderful role models within society. We all go through that because it's a natural occurrence of difference. And then what happens is harm. That's what makes a refugee. State harm through criminalisation, fear of arrest, detention or torture, non-state agent harm. We're not just talking about extrajudicial killings. We're talking about the mob. We're talking about what HT had to go through, that his neighbourhood said, you are different, you are wrong, we will kill you. And then that goes also to family honour killing. Wonderful experts, the reason why I do this work is because of my clients. I definitely don't do it for the money. And my clients are the most wonderful people. So this is why my lesbian asylum seeker from Malawi. When did you realise you were a lesbian? Asked the Home Office. I realised I was different when I was a young girl. I was a tomboy. Okay, let's go through it. In September 2011, I canvassed the DISH model at an informal meeting of experts in Pennsylvania. This is now endorsed by the UNHCR in their guidelines in October 2012. And what I'm saying is perception is the key. The individual, it's not because they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or intersex. Come on, most of the persecutors wouldn't be able to understand or comprehend such concepts. It's because you're not straight enough. You don't fit in to what I demand that you must possess in relation to the expression of your identity outside the home. Too much of a fixation has gone on to relation to proving that you're LGBTI. Why is that important? And I'll skip to that. In 2011, the upper tribunal in a case called SW Jamaica accepted that even straight women in Jamaica could be perceived as lesbians if they do not conform to a specific heterosexual narrative. The potential persecutor will say, well, wait a minute here, you have no male partner, you have no children, you are between the ages of 16 to 60, so therefore the potential persecutor will say, why are you not sexually receptive to me? And if the individual doesn't have a heterosexual narrative to support them, even a straight woman in Jamaica can be perceived as a lesbian and be at risk of persecution. These are examples of clients which I can cover in the questions, but what is important to note is that the interview technique must be humane. It must concentrate on expressions of sexual or gender identity outside the bedroom and outside the home, and it should also recognise that the key factor is a lack of heteronormative conformity. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm the founder of No Going Back, and I think just very briefly I'll describe why we set No Going Back up. In an environment where legal aid is cut back, and solicitors, you hear them saying to you, oh, I'm not doing legal aid anymore, I'm moving to a more lucrative area of law. This results in people not getting the legal representation they deserve. As we've heard tonight, to really do an LGBT case justice, it really isn't achievable on legal aid. It's just not profitably viable. At the end of the day, a great deal of solicitors and law firms have to turn a profit. And in reality, an LGBT case really doesn't turn a profit if you give it the time and energy that they need. So, I decided, after I'd sold my company, what was I going to do? I didn't want to say goodbye to the footballers totally. They're very nice. Well, they have very nice legs to start with. And one of the most kind of enjoyable kind of experiences going to the football clubs and representing on cases. And it's a bit of a thrill. But I thought, no, I want to actually spend some of my time on something that is going to make a difference. So I decided to start now going back. It's at the very beginning of its life, so it's only been around a year, and I'm sure, as Peter will say, charities take a long time to develop. And we're going through changes, we're establishing something that is very new, but I think something that is very much needed. We spoke with Stonewall, the Metro Centre in London, and I said, is this a duplication of anything? And they said, absolutely not. There are not many people out there who will take on LGBT cases for free. I don't tell the footballers, but they're actually paying for it. So, No Going Back takes its name from the report, the Stonewall report, that highlighted the plight of LGBT asylum seekers, and that was in 2010. And we thought it was a very appropriate name, because in reality, as you've heard, there is no going back for the majority of people. No going back it comes from, hopefully, we are going to evolve fully from the LGBT society, because I find that that's very important. That it's far easier for somebody who's gay to talk to somebody who's gay about their asylum case. You can have really friendly LGBT solicitors, but do they fully understand? I'm sure that some of them do, and they offer great advice, but at the end of the day, sometimes you have to have a very open and frank discussion about the most intimate and personal areas of your life. And you don't want to be judged in any way. So if they know that you're gay, it's a lot easier, because we don't have to overcome that barrier. So, we've covered the area of credibility. It's incredibly hard. And in a fast-track situation, really, you don't have the time to try and explain to somebody about how they're going to build their credibility. Now, do you remember when you came to the LSE, you had an interview? Did you have an interview? No. Oh, wow. It's not like my days at university. I had an interview, and I was called to the professor's office, and he said, "You've got 5 minutes. Tell me why we should accept you." And I remember being terribly scared. And it was just a general question about why I should go to university. Luckily enough, they took me. But just imagine, you've been on a journey for maybe 7 hours, or maybe it's been 7 weeks or 7 months, and you arrive in the UK, and you've come off the back of a lorry, or maybe you've been smuggled into the country, and you turn up at the Home Office and they say, "So why are you claiming asylum?" So you have your initial kind of conversation with the Home Office. How did they know that the authorities here are going to be any different from the authorities in their country? A lot of the time, they're told by the agent, a lot of them not very pleasant people, well, give them this story, it'll guarantee you asylum. How many of your clients have you heard that story before, Chelvan? Many times? So, they go along and they say, right, I know what my story is, I've been told what it is, and they rehearse it, and they tell the Home Office. Well, in reality, that's not the story that is really true, but they've been told that will get them asylum. So, ultimately, they're found not to be telling the truth, and then they say, oh, well, I'm going to now tell the truth. Do you think the Home Office is really going to believe them on take two? I had a phone call yesterday, and it was from a detention centre, and it was from an Afghan. He'd made 3 claims for asylum before. That's quite common. And he said, right, I've got to tell you the truth. And he said, I have to tell you now because it's an extreme situation. I'm gay. I never said it before because I didn't really want to say it. And that goes back to the internalised homophobia that many asylum seekers have. There is also, I think this is a very difficult kind of thing to understand, but for a lot of asylum seekers, they're in a community. They're actually supported while they're here. Well, gay asylum seekers, there isn't a church or a community centre generally that they can go to, or that they feel comfortable in. So that is one of the reasons why No Going Back was set up, so that they feel that they can go somewhere for some support. My Afghan is getting deported tomorrow. When I explained to him that he could make the fresh claim, I explained the law through an interpreter. He went to the centre staff and they said, oh, you can't do that because we've got your ticket. You're going tomorrow. And really, you've made 3 claims before. So this is always the challenge that asylum seekers face with this credibility issue. Oh, claiming asylum, on sexuality is the easy thing to do. It really isn't. Asylum isn't easy, as Peter said. How many of you are actually international students? You are never going home. How do you feel? One lady looked very excited. But in reality, that thought of never going home because you're a fear of your life is such a... I couldn't comprehend it. Never to see my family or never to go back to the place I was born. It's really difficult. So legal aid cuts have resulted in either asylum seekers attending court with no legal representation at all, or having a case very quickly put together. These people are really isolated because they can't talk about it to their friends because they're very scared themselves about coming out in the community. To actually you have to perform like that interview that you didn't have for the LSE, but the interview that I had when I went to university, it takes quite a long time to get one of your clients to perform in the right way, to actually meet the stereotypical idea, almost, which I hate to do, but to convince the Home Office that you're gay. So I spend a long time teaching people to sing YMCA. I had a phone call the other week from somebody in detention again who was a Russian asylum seeker. He just wanted to confirm that he'd gone through the full legal process and there were no further rights of appeal. He said, I'm being returned. I've been here 7 years, I've been living life as a gay man. They believed me, but the words were, I was only facing discrimination, not persecution in Russia. So, this is why I decided that we would start No Going Back. It's in its first year, or just over that. We didn't have a pink birthday cake. I'm going to have to find out who baked yours, Chelvan.
My mother.
Your mother, right. We did have cupcakes, though. So, I think that for our asylum seekers, I think the Home Office do need further training. Because, ironically, guess who number 5 is on Stonewall's gay-friendly employers. Do you know who it is? The Home Office. Unbelievable that the Home Office, who come out with the kind of questions that they ask gay asylum seekers, would they ask such questions to their own staff? No. The answer is absolutely not. So we can see that further training needs to be done. I read those questions in The Guardian, or was it The Observer? And I thought, I'd be highly embarrassed to answer anything like that, especially in front of a stranger. Why does the Home Office focus on the bedroom? Nothing much happens in my bedroom, if I'm being honest. It's a same-sex relationship, and it's the same sex every night, as this. And I think, gosh, maybe. There you go. Maybe it's time for that open relationship. But at the end of the day, if I had to disclose what we didn't do in the bedroom, it's something that I feel terribly embarrassed about. So, I want to leave you with a thought. Because I don't know, am I within time?
You are within time.
In time, okay. And I thought, from having spoken to a lot of our asylum seekers that we've helped and we've taken phone calls from, gay doesn't always mean happy. Think about it. It really doesn't for a great deal of asylum seekers, and especially when they're deported back to their country to live discreetly. Thank you.
I realise we don't have much time, but I really would regret terribly if we don't open it up to questions in that very short period. So immediately it's over to you. Any questions and comments to the panel you have? Yes, please. Speak up though, it's hard to hear.
Initially, my gut reaction was no, because the assumption is that those specialists will be gay or lesbian or trans, and I'm actually, contrary to what Stuart says, is that I don't believe that you need to be LGBTI to deal with an LGBTI case. I've never felt that way at all. So that was my fear, because some of the worst questioning my asylum seekers had was, for example, a lesbian from Jamaica. The gay presenting officer said, well, it's clearly a phase, she'll grow out of it. And that was the case which was taken up to the Court of Appeal called NR Jamaica. And then a trans female presenting officer told my gay man from Sudan, well, just because you go to gay club doesn't mean that you're gay. And that case had to go up to the Court of Appeal called OO Sudan and come back, and now he's a refugee. But last November I was invited by the Swedish Migration Board to go to Stockholm to give them training on the DISH model, and I was totally surprised and very appreciative of their model, which does have specialist case owners which are linked to LGBTI cases. Well, not just LGBTI, but also straight, who receive specific training. So I'm not averse to that. Having not seen that in sort of a working model prior to going to Stockholm last November, I'm thinking that maybe that is the way forward. Because unfortunately, if you have all case owners taking on LGBTI cases, you have the horrendous, dehumanising questioning we had as evidence in the October 2013 transcript of the bisexual asylum seeker. So I very much am for that model now. Yeah. I totally agree.
Thank you. Yes, please.
So I wonder, because at one hand, we're providing aid to some of the countries be open, and some of it take that challenge. And it seems like government may be really hard for that. Do you see that this is
I can just say, I think it is a dilemma that is relevant to LGBTI. Immigration, and you have the asylum decision involving I think. But yeah,
I mean, interesting enough, in paragraph 3, being a typical lawyer, I remember paragraph 3 of the judgment of H.A. Iran and H.C. Cameroon, Lord Hope actually said that this is a signal to the government to go out there and combat and fight this sort of persecution in countries outside the UK, which is a wonderful rallying cry to say, look, we need to go out there and change things. And the government has been committed through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, through the toolkit which was started in a couple of years ago by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, to make sure that British embassies, British High Commissions, had the rainbow flag held up high on Pride days, and went out in community organisations to engage with grassroots activists. But I think there's a different issue in relation to when it comes to whether we should link aid to these countries with respect to their policies in relation to the LGBTI community. I think that's a far more complex argument, and it's very much an issue where a lot of those grassroots NGOs are saying, look, if you stop the aid, we're going to suffer more. So I think that's something which is far more complicated than we can address in 5 minutes today. But importantly, the point is that if people come to from these countries to the UK, we have an international obligation to make them safe.
Can I just add on that point? I think this issue applies right across the board to all human rights abuse and violations, not just LGBT ones. And my strategy to the government has always been not to cut aid, but to switch aid. If you cut aid, you're punishing poor, vulnerable people who depend on British aid in many cases for food, clean water, the basics of life. They are not the cause of a lot of persecution in most cases. Maybe in some cases, but in most cases, it is the governments and extremist vigilante groups that are doing the terrorisation. But switching aid to local governments or NGOs within those countries that do not discriminate, it sort of sends a signal to the government, but also makes sure the aid gets through to vulnerable people.
Thank you. Yes.
Bans, I think, were very disturbing from when I saw them, and the changes in the appeals rights, which I'm sure is it 14 down to 4? Is it?
Early on human rights and refugee convention.
So it always makes me kind of wonder why we are moving from a supposedly tolerant society where it's just a fair game to one where we're changing the rules that are actually, I feel, this is my personal opinion, that the immigration rules are actually being dictated by Daily Express readers and Daily Mail readers. We don't want to miss them out. But I do feel that the whole of our immigration policy is almost dictated. I actually was interviewed by Al Jazeera last week, and I said I subscribe to the Home Office updates. And I said, you know what? I would really like one day to receive the Home Office update, and it said, we've granted asylum to 15 people who are LGBT, and you know what? They're not going to be sent home to be persecuted. Instead, the whole focus and the whole kind of ethos around the Home Office is actually returning people. That's how I feel it anyway. And that it's about, oh no, we've sent so many back. My goodness, the LSE wouldn't be standing today, and the NHS and all these other organisations, if it wasn't for the migrant communities. The Home Office really does need to look at the positive aspects of immigration, or focus on them now and again instead of this constant obsession with returning people. Let's return back to the actual basics of what I feel it is to be British, of giving somebody a fair chance and fair justice. I think that's we're moving away. And if we're actually starting to drive vans, telling people to go home, it's a very sad reflection on our system of today.
Let me just take another question, last question, I'm afraid. Just take this person here who was waiting. Yeah. Sorry.
The policy is not bad. It's really not bad. Policy in Europe, and it has to be commended. The difficulty is the implementation, and that's where we need to focus our energies. Implementation is simply just not being implemented, and so one way to do that is training. However, how we think about training, we need to reflect on with this group. As all of the talks have shown, it is a complex caseload, and it's a very, I'm not gay, and I'm not lesbian, and I even have to check myself on terminology, because I don't have an understanding. I need to learn from other people how I would go about this. So how much more an asylum decision maker who can come from any sort of group of society. And I think there's an academic, Jenny Milbank, who talks a lot about self-awareness of decision makers. What she talks about is the need for decision makers to step away from their decision-making role and have a time where they can reflect on their own personal prejudices, which we all have, and how that's impacting the objectivity of their decision-making. And I think more soft skills as well need to be introduced into training, and it needs to be ongoing, not one-off, so we can tell Parliament we've trained all of the decision makers and that leave it for 10 years. It needs to be ongoing. So I think soft skills, interviewing skills, and this self-awareness regularly would be a good start to see implementation of the policy. And yes, of course, refining of policy is always an ongoing thing.
Before we get to implementation, we have to really engage with interpretation of the policy. Because a lot of NGOs were involved in the drafting of the asylum instruction in October 2010 and the update in June 2011 to the UNHCR. I worked a lot with the UK Lesbian Gay Immigration Group with our input, and the Home Office didn't accept everything. It accepted a few elements, but not everything. I think let's face some hard, cold facts. There are always going to be people who are prejudiced against LGBTI people. There will always be homophobia. There will always be transphobia. The battle is to educate. That's the central battleground in relation to policy considerations of decision making. And the other battle, my three favourite words, litigate, litigate, litigate. Seriously. Because, as I said, I've been in this field for 13 years. And the way we've actually forced the Home Office to look at these issues, because remember, it was the Home Office barrister in 2004 in November which introduced the reasonable tolerability discretion test. Now, that was a Labour government, guys, not the Tory government. A Labour government which said, we're fine with this, we will send back LGBTIs. Since then, of course, since the Supreme Court decision, the Labour Party said, oh, we really apologise. I'm sorry, too late. This was your policy to send back LGBT, well, lesbian, gay, bisexuals. They didn't enforce this on trans people because of clear problems they've had with that, because of expressions of gender identity. But importantly, the way we develop humane policies is through education and litigation, and because of the drastic changes to legal aid, which still cover asylum cases, the 10% cutback, but still cover asylum cases, is to strangle the legal aid budget. So we're not going to be able to afford to take these cases through the courts. So, I could party political broadcast here, but if any of you, as human rights activists, vote for the Tories at the next election, you deserve stringing up. Because seriously, any lawyer worth their salt is seeing the complete dissolution, disabandonment, the complete destruction of our ability to have checks and balances with the state. This is Political Theory 101 and Political Institutions 101, guys. Because this is what's happening. Because the government are getting sick of losing cases. That's right. And we still live in a common law world where it's judge-made as well as parliamentary-made law. But Parliament has given us these powers to do that. So, we really need to be aware that what is happening is not just cuts because we can't afford the legal aid budget. We're seeing a clear agenda to make sure that individuals can't properly enforce our human rights. First it's the asylum seekers, then it's the immigrants, and then it's you and me.
I think on that note we should probably wrap up. Thank you so much to the panel for an excellent discussion that they presented and in a very complex field. And I hope you join me thanking them once more. Thank you.